A hand closed around her wrist and twisted hard. She gasped and went down on one knee, her gown tearing against the wet gravel. Above her, a man's voice hissed something low and cruel. She tore free. She ran. Behind her, boots pounded the stone path, gaining with every step. She crashed through a tall door into a room full of candlelight. Silver, crystal, a long table set for 20 guests, and not a single second to think. So she dropped to the floor and crawled beneath it, pulling the white cloth down behind her, holding her breath in the dark. Her name was Clara, and the man whose boots she could now hear out in the hall was her husband. At the head of that table sat the most powerful man in England. What he did next, no one in that room expected. Stay with me on this one. Under that table, Clara did not move. She pressed her back against the carved leg of it and pulled her knees up tight. Her heart was going so hard she was certain the whole room could hear it. The boots had stopped out in the hall. She could hear them now, slow and heavy. The sound of a man who was in no hurry, because he knew the doors were few and she had nowhere left to run. Now, you need to understand who was chasing her. His name was Lord Hargrove, a baron, a man with land and money and a temper that he kept hidden behind good manners in front of the right people. In front of Clara, he kept nothing hidden. 3 years she had been his wife. 3 years she had learned the sound of his footsteps the way a soldier learns the sound of cannon. Heavy meant anger. Slow meant he wanted her to be afraid before he ever raised a hand. And he had raised his hands plenty. That night he had gone further than ever before. There had been a thing said at supper, some small thing, a fork set down wrong. And he had come across the room at her with a look she had seen once before, on the night his first wife was spoken of in whispers and never spoken of again. Clara had not waited to find out what that look meant. She had run. Out the side door, across the wet lawn, over the low wall that divided his land from the great estate next to it. And she had crashed through the first door she found. She did not know whose house this was. She only knew it was big, and it was full of light, and there were people in it. People meant witnesses. Witnesses meant maybe, just maybe, he would not dare. That was the whole of her plan. There was no more to it than that. Now here is the thing she did not know yet. The house she had stumbled into belonged to the Duke of Ashford. And the long table she was hiding beneath was set for the most important dinner of his season. 12 guests, a bishop, 2 members of Parliament, and at the far end, a man named Sir Walter Pembroke, who happened to be the magistrate for the whole county. The law itself was eating soup 4 feet above her head. Clara knew none of that. She only knew that a hand had just lifted the edge of the tablecloth. She froze. Fingers drew the white linen back, slow and careful, and a face leaned down into the dark with her. A man older than her, perhaps 40. Calm gray eyes. A hard, clean-shaven jaw. He did not shout. He did not call out. He looked at her, at the torn gown, at the red mark already rising on her cheek, at the locket clutched white-knuckled in her fist, her mother's locket, the one thing she had carried out of her old life and into this one. He looked at all of it in about 2 seconds. And then the Duke of Ashford did the first surprising thing of that night. He smiled at her. A small, steady smile. The kind you give a frightened animal to tell it you mean no harm. He raised one finger to his lips. Quiet. And he let the cloth fall back down. Above the table, his voice came easy and warm, not a tremor in it. Forgive me, gentlemen. I dropped my napkin like a schoolboy. There was light laughter. Glasses clinked. The dinner went on. And Clara, in the dark, began to cry without making a single sound, because for the first time in 3 years a stranger had looked at her bruises and not looked away. But the boots in the hall were closer now. She heard a servant's voice, high and nervous. "Sir, you cannot. Sir, His Grace is dining." And then a second voice, low, smooth, horribly familiar. "I am looking for my wife," said Lord Hargrove. "And I have been told she ran in here." Under the table, Clara stopped breathing altogether. because she knew that voice could charm a room in under a minute. She knew how reasonable he could sound. And she knew that the moment those gray-eyed people above her heard the word wife, every law in England would be standing on his side of the table, and not on hers. The Duke set down his glass. The Duke of Ashford rose from his chair. He did not hurry. He set his napkin beside his plate, smoothed his coat, and walked the length of that long table toward the doors with the unbothered ease of a man who had never once in his life been told no. His guests watched him go. The bishop half rose, unsure. The Duke waved him back down with one hand. In the doorway stood Lord Hargrove. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a riding crop still in his gloved hand, though there was no horse in sight. He had not even troubled to wipe the mud from his boots. His eyes were already moving past the Duke, scanning the room, the table, the dark space beneath it. "Lord Hargrove," said the Duke. Not a question. A greeting with a closed door behind it. "Your Grace." Hargrove gave a short bow, all politeness now. "I must beg your pardon for the intrusion. It is a matter of some urgency. My wife has taken ill in her mind. She has wandered from my house in a confusion, and a groom swears he saw her cross onto your land. I mean only to take her home and see her cared for. It was a good lie. Smooth, reasonable, the kind of thing a worried husband might say." 2 or 3 of the guests murmured with sympathy. A sick wife. How dreadful. How good of him to come himself. The Duke did not murmur anything. "Ill in her mind," he repeated. "Gravely, I'm afraid. And you searched for this gravely ill woman with a riding crop in your hand." The room went quiet. Hargrove's smile stayed where it was, but something behind it shifted. He glanced down at the crop as though he had forgotten it was there. A habit, nothing more. The night is dark, and a man should carry something on strange ground. "My ground is not strange," the Duke said, "and it is not yours. Now here is where it turned." The Duke took one step closer to Hargrove, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped to something quiet and flat that carried to every corner of that silent room. "There is no ill woman in my house. There is no wife of yours here. There is a magistrate at my table, Sir Walter Pembroke, whom you are welcome to consult, and there are 11 other gentlemen of standing who will all tell you the same. You have come into a duke's home, uninvited, muddy, armed, and you have made a scene in front of half the county. So I will say this once. Turn around. Go back across that wall. And do not set foot on my land again tonight." You could have heard a pin drop. Hargrove was a baron. The Duke was a duke. In that world, in that room, the distance between those 2 ranks was a canyon, and every man present knew it. To defy a duke in his own house, in front of a magistrate, over a matter the Duke had just publicly denied, could not be done. Not by a man who wished to keep his name. For a long moment Hargrove did not move. His knuckles whitened on the crop. His eyes flicked once, just once, to the white tablecloth and the shadow beneath it. And Clara, in that shadow, looked back at the gap in the linen and saw her husband's eyes find the place where she was hidden. She was sure of it. She was certain he had seen her. But Hargrove straightened. He gave a stiff, furious little bow. "Of course, Your Grace. Forgive me. I am beside myself with worry. I will trouble you no further tonight." That last word. Tonight. He set it down like a card he meant to play later. And then he turned, and his muddy boots carried him back out through the doors, and down the hall, and the great front door of Ashford House boomed shut behind him. Silence. Then the Duke turned back to his table, and to the 12 astonished faces of his guests, and he said, in an entirely ordinary voice, "Gentlemen, I'm afraid I have not been completely honest with you." He walked back to the table. He bent down, and he lifted the tablecloth. "You can come out now," he said gently. "He's gone." Clara did not move at first. Her body would not believe it. Then a hand reached in. The Duke's hand, open, palm up, waiting, not grabbing, just offered. After a moment she took it, and he drew her out from under the table and up onto her feet into the light. The room gasped. A woman, young, a torn gown, a bruise blooming dark across one cheekbone, a locket clutched against her chest. The wife who, 30 seconds ago, their host had sworn was not there. No one said a word. The Duke did not explain himself, and not one of those powerful men dared to ask him to. "Sit her by the fire," he said to a servant. "Bring water. Bring brandy. Bring a blanket." He looked at Clara, and his voice softened until it was only for her. "You're safe. You hear me? In this house tonight you are safe. No one is going to touch you." And Clara, lowered into a deep chair by the warmth of the fire, a glass of water pressed into her shaking hands, a blanket settled over her shoulders, finally let herself believe it. It was over. He was gone. She had run, and a stranger had stood between her and the worst thing in her life, and won, and now it was finished. She closed her eyes. She breathed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the fear let go of her chest, just a little. She was wrong. The front door did not boom this time. Crashed. It crashed open without a knock, and the boots came back down the hall fast. And this time they were not alone. There were 2 sets of them now, and the second man wore the dark coat and carried the heavy stave of a parish constable. Lord Hargrove walked back into that dining room a changed man. The worry was gone from his face. The apology was gone. He had been outranked an hour ago and sent away like a servant, and he had spent that hour doing the one thing that could turn the tables on a duke. He had gone to fetch the law. "There she is," Hargrove said, and he pointed the riding crop straight at Clara by the fire. "There is my wife. You see her, Constable. You all see her now." And just like that, everything changed, because there was no hiding her anymore. She was standing in plain sight, in the Duke's own dining room, a fact in front of 14 witnesses. The Duke's word that she was not there, the word he had given an hour ago, was now plainly, provably a lie. And every man in that room had just watched it become one. Hargrove turned to the long table, and his eyes went to one man in particular. "Sir Walter Pembroke, magistrate of this county. I am glad beyond words to find you here, because you of all men will know your duty." Sir Walter set down his glass very slowly. He was an old man, careful, not unkind, with a long memory and a deep respect for the law he had served for 30 years. He did not want to be standing up. You could see that plain on his face. But he stood. "Lord Hargrove," he said, "mind your tone in this house. I'll mind it gladly, the moment I have my wife back." Hargrove's voice rang out now, sure of itself, because for the first time that night the ground beneath him was solid. "I make no accusation against His Grace. Perhaps he was deceived. Perhaps he believed some story this woman told him. But the facts are not in question. That woman is Clara Hargrove. She is my lawful wedded wife these 3 years. And under the law of England, a wife belongs to her husband's keeping. There is no duke and no bishop and no magistrate alive who can change that. She is mine, and I am taking her home. Now I want you to understand exactly what just happened, because this is the part that matters. An hour ago, this was a frightened woman hiding from a violent man. That was a thing the Duke could fix. He had rank, he had a house full of witnesses, he had a door he could throw a man out of. One cruel man against all of that did not stand a chance. But this was no longer one cruel man. This was the law. In England, in those years, a married woman owned nothing, not even herself. She could not hold property. She could not sign a paper. In the eyes of every court in the land, she and her husband were one single person, and that person was him. A wife who fled was not a free woman seeking safety. She was, in plain legal fact, stolen goods. And any man who kept her from her husband, duke or not, was a thief. So the question in that room was no longer, will the Duke protect her? The question was, can he? Because the most powerful man in England had just run headfirst into the one thing more powerful than any duke. He had run into the law itself, and the law was standing at his table in the shape of a tired old magistrate, and the law was on Hargrove's side. Clara felt it happen. She felt the room turn. She saw the sympathy on those faces curdle into something else. Discomfort, doubt, the slow retreat of men who had just remembered that the law is the law and a scandal is a scandal, and neither was worth their good name. One by one, she felt them let go of her. She set down the glass of water. Her hand had started shaking again. And the Duke stood very still at the head of his table, and for the first time that whole night, Clara saw him take a breath before he spoke. She understood in that moment that he was about to do something that would cost him. That the easy thing, the smart thing, the thing any sensible man in his position would do, was to give her up. Let the constable take her. Apologize for the confusion. Save his name, save his evening, save himself. She waited for him to do it. She had learned over 3 years that this was what men did in the end. They saved themselves. The Duke of Ashford looked at the constable. He looked at the magistrate. He looked, last of all, at Hargrove, and at that riding crop pointed across the room at a bruised and shaking woman. And then he stepped sideways, slow and deliberate, until he stood directly between Lord Hargrove and Clara, his back to her, his face to all of them. "No," he said, "just that. One word." And he did not move. If you have ever in your own life watched one person decide to stand in the way of something far bigger than themselves, just because it was the right thing to do, then you know the feeling in that room. And if a story like this one means something to you, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button, because these are exactly the stories I am here to tell. Now, back to that dining room, and the word the Duke had just thrown down like a gauntlet. "No," the Duke said again. "She stays. You cannot keep her." Hargrove's voice climbed. "I don't care whose house this is. The law is the law. Sir Walter, I demand you do your office. Take that woman into custody and return her to her husband, or by God I'll have your post." Sir Walter looked miserable. He looked at the Duke. "Your Grace, he is not wrong about the law. A wife is her husband's charge. If he presses the claim, and he is pressing it, I have no ground to refuse him. I am sorry. I truly am. But you are asking me to break my oath." "I am asking you to do your office," the Duke said, "which is more than the keeping of one bad law. Tell me, Sir Walter, does the law of England require you to deliver a woman into the hands of a man who will kill her?" The room went still. "That is a grave word," Sir Walter said quietly. "It is. I use it with care." The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lord Hargrove was married once before. I am sure several of you remember the lady. A gentle woman. She died young in the country, after a fall down a staircase that no servant witnessed, and the matter was closed before it was ever rightly opened, because the man whose staircase it was had money and friends and a smooth way of speaking. As we have all seen tonight, Hargrove's face had gone the color of ash. You will not speak of her. I will speak of whatever I please in my own house." The Duke turned to the magistrate. "Look at this woman, Sir Walter. Not at her husband. Her. Look at her face. That bruise is hours old. The gown is torn at the shoulder where she was seized. You have served the law 30 years. You have seen the marks of fist leaves. Look, and then tell me your oath requires you to send her back for more." And Sir Walter looked. He really looked for the first time at Clara by the fire, at the dark swelling along her cheekbone, at the way she flinched when Hargrove so much as shifted his weight, at the torn seam, at 3 years of a thing she had never once been able to say out loud, written plain on her body for an old magistrate to read. And his face changed. But Hargrove was not finished. Because a cornered man with money always has one more move, and Hargrove reached for it now. This is slander and theft dressed up as charity. The Duke wants the woman for himself, that much is plain. I'll have this in every paper in London. The great Duke of Ashford, a thief and a seducer, stealing wives from their lawful husbands. See how your fine name looks then, your grace. See how many of these gentlemen are still at your table when I am done. It was a real threat. Scandal could ruin even a duke. And for a moment the room held its breath to see whether the most powerful man there would flinch from it. The duke smiled, and it was not a warm smile. You'll have it in every paper, will you? He walked, unhurried, to a writing desk against the wall, and he took from a drawer a thin packet of folded papers tied with a faded ribbon, and he held them up for the room to see. Then, while you are talking to the papers, Lord Hargrove, perhaps you'll explain these. Your promissory notes, your debts, £11,000 of them, bought up quietly this past year by your creditors and sold on, every last one, to me. I own your debt, sir. I own your house in all but name. I have been holding these for a rainy night. And do you know, I believe it is raining. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Hargrove stared at the papers in the Duke's hand the way a man stares at his own ruin. £11,000. One word from the Duke and the creditors would close in, and the house and the land and the name would all go under, and everyone in that room knew it. He had come in with the law on his side. And in the space of 2 minutes the Duke had shown him that the law was not enough, that the death of his first wife could be opened up again, and that his entire fortune was already, quietly, in another man's pocket. Something in Hargrove broke. The smooth voice was gone. The manners were gone. 3 years of what he truly was came roaring up all at once, and he forgot the constable, forgot the magistrate, forgot every witness in the room. He saw only Clara, the cause of all of it, and he lunged for her across the floor with the riding crop raised high to bring it down on her. "You did this," he screamed. "You worthless little—" He never landed the blow. The Duke caught his wrist in mid-air, an inch from Clara's upturned face, and held it. Hargrove was a big man, but the Duke held that arm like an iron bar, the crop quivering uselessly above them both, and for one long second the two men stood locked together in front of the whole room. And every soul in it had now seen, with their own eyes, exactly what Clara had been running from. The magistrate had seen it. The constable had seen it. A bishop and 2 members of Parliament had seen it. There was no smooth word left in all of England that could explain away a man trying to horsewhip a cowering woman in a duke's dining room. The Duke twisted the crop from his hand and threw it into the fire. "Constable," he said, without taking his eyes off Hargrove, "you came here tonight to seize someone. There is your man." The constable took Lord Hargrove that night. It was not, in the end, for what he had done to Clara, because the law in those days still had no good word for that. It was for the assault witnessed by 14 people in a duke's home. And it was for the questions that a magistrate, once his eyes are opened, cannot close again. Sir Walter rode out the next morning to the county where Hargrove's first wife had died, and he started asking the questions that should have been asked years before. That is another story, and not a happy one for Lord Hargrove. He never set foot near Clara again. But that night, when the door had shut on him for the last time and the boots had gone for good, the dining room slowly came back to life. The bishop poured Clara a small glass of wine with his own hands. The members of Parliament, who an hour before had been edging toward the door, now could not do enough for her. People are like that. They follow the strongest man in the room. And the strongest man in the room had decided, plainly and finally, where he stood. Clara sat by the fire and could not stop trembling, and the Duke knelt down beside her chair so that his eyes were level with hers, and he did not say a single grand thing. "It's done," he said. "He's gone. You never have to see him again." She looked at him. This stranger, this man whose house she had broken into a few hours ago, whose dinner she had ruined, whose name she had put at risk, and who had stood between her and the worst of her life and not stepped aside. "Why?" she asked. It was the only word she had. "You didn't know me. Why would you do all that for someone you'd never met?" The Duke was quiet for a moment. "My mother," he said at last, "married a man much like yours, and I was a boy in that house, and I was not big enough yet to stand between them. I told myself that when I was a grown man, with everything I have, I would never again stand in a room where that was happening and do nothing." He looked at the fire. "Tonight you crawled under my table. I think I have been waiting most of my life for someone to crawl under my table. That was all." He didn't make a speech of it. He stood, and he told the housekeeper to make up a room, and he gave Clara the only thing she truly needed that night, which was a door she could lock from the inside, in a house where no one would ever try the handle. Now, I'll tell you how it ended, because I think you have earned it. Clara stayed at Ashford House while the lawyers did their slow work. And the law, which had been so firmly on Hargrove's side, has a way of changing its mind about a man who is awaiting trial and drowning in debt. A separation was arranged. It was rare in those days and difficult, and it took the full weight of a duke to push it through. But it was done. For the first time in her adult life, Clara belonged to no one but herself. She did not fall into the Duke's arms. That is not how it went, and I won't pretend it was. She had spent 3 years learning to be afraid of a man's footsteps, and that does not heal in a season. For a long while they were only two people who took breakfast together, and walked the grounds and talked. He never once reached for her. He had learned, somewhere, that the kindest thing you can offer a person who has been grabbed all their life is the simple promise that you will wait until they reach for you. And one spring morning, a year on, she did. They were walking by the low wall, the very wall she had climbed over that first wet night, and she stopped and she worked the wedding ring off her finger at last. It had never come off in 3 years. Came off easily now. She set it on top of the wall and left it there in the sun, and she did not look back at it. Then she put her hand in his. It was the same hand he had once reached under a dinner table. Palm up, open, waiting and not grabbing. She had taken it then because she was drowning and it was the only thing in reach. She took it now because she wanted to. There is all the difference in the world between those two things. They were married the following year. Quietly. No bishop, no members of parliament, no long table set for 20. Just the two of them, a country church, and a sky that did not threaten rain. And here, at the end, is the thing worth carrying out of this story. We are taught to think of power as a fist, as the biggest man in the room, the loudest voice, the one who can make others afraid. Hargrove had that kind of power, and he had the law stacked on top of it, and for 1 hour in that dining room it looked like more than enough. But there was a greater power in that room. It was quieter. It belonged to a man who could have saved himself and chose to stand in the way instead. The strongest thing the Duke of Ashford ever did was not throw a man out, or call in a debt, or break a wrist an inch from a frightened woman's face. It was lift a tablecloth, look at a stranger crouched in the dark, and decide, before he knew a single thing about her, that no one was going to touch her while he stood in that house. That is what the Duke did. And it began with a woman hiding under his table, with no plan, and nowhere left to run.